The Galactic Empire had ruled the stars for thousands of years, spreading fear and obedience wherever its massive fleets traveled. Entire planets had fallen silent before their dark banners, surrendering without a fight, terrified by the stories of destruction that followed those who dared to resist. Their newest target was a small, seemingly unimportant blue planet called Earth. To the rulers of the Empire, humans were just another primitive species, too young and too weak to stand against the mighty force that had crushed civilizations far older and more powerful. A meeting was held deep within the Empire's Grand Council chambers, a place built from blackened stone and filled with cold, heavy silence. The high commanders sat around a long table, their faces hidden behind shining masks, their voices low and sharp as they discussed the strategy. There was no debate about the outcome. Earth would fall, just like all the others. But they decided this time they would not waste resources on a full invasion. They would do what they did best, frighten the humans into surrendering before the first shot was even fired. It would be simple. They would send their most terrifying emissary, a giant creature named Vrothak, whose name alone could make seasoned warriors tremble. Along with him, a small fleet of their most fearsome ships would descend into Earth's skies, casting shadows over the human cities and showing the people that resistance was hopeless. They would broadcast a message of doom, listing the countless worlds that had been destroyed before, making it clear that Earth's only chance was immediate and unconditional surrender. The plan was brilliant, flawless, and efficient, just as the Empire liked things to be. Vrothak stood in his personal warship, preparing for the mission with grim satisfaction. He had seen countless species crumble before his words. He didn't need weapons. His speeches alone had driven entire populations into surrender, sometimes even into despair. His tall, armored body was covered in dark plates that gleamed under the ship's cold lights. His voice had been trained to project fear, each syllable designed to break spirits. He studied the files on humans, barely glancing through reports that described them as emotional, impulsive, and foolish creatures. He found it amusing. They would likely fall even faster than most. As the fleet raced toward Earth, cutting through the blackness of space like blades, Vrothak rehearsed his speech one final time, already picturing the frightened faces of the humans as they begged for mercy. To him, Earth was just another nameless rock that would be forgotten once it was conquered. He had no reason to believe this mission would be any different from the others. Victory was not just expected, it was certain. Back on Earth, life continued peacefully, unaware of the storm that was racing toward it. Then, one night, without warning, the skies split open. Great black ships appeared above the major cities, their shapes blocking out the stars, their presence swallowing the air in a heavy, invisible grip. People looked up in confusion and fear, pointing at the strange shapes hovering silently above. News channels scrambled to cover the phenomenon, while military forces tried to organize a response. Then the message came. Every screen, every radio, every device, even the emergency sirens, were taken over by a single, cold voice. Vrothak's face appeared, his glowing eyes staring directly into the hearts of humanity. He spoke of the Empire's power, of the countless civilizations erased from existence. He described worlds turned to ash, and people who once thought themselves mighty, now forgotten dust scattered across the stars. His words were sharp and slow, designed to leave no doubt. Humanity had no future unless it knelt before the Empire immediately. For a long moment, silence ruled the earth. People listened, frozen by the gravity of the threat, the skies rumbling softly as the massive ships loomed overhead like silent judges. In the great cities and small villages, in bright homes and dark shelters, humans absorbed the message. Parents held their children closer, soldiers tightened their grips on their weapons, and leaders whispered urgent conversations. Fear crept into every corner. But then something strange began to happen, something no one could have predicted. A chuckle. Somewhere in the crowd gathered in a city square, a single person laughed an uncertain, half-nervous laugh. It caught on like wildfire. Soon, another person laughed, then another, and then a wave of laughter rose from the streets. It wasn't the laughter of madness or terror. It was the sound of people realizing how ridiculous it was that someone believed they could be so easily broken. It was the sound of defiance born from the deepest parts of the human soul, a spirit that would not be crushed by mere threats. The laughter spread. Across cities, across countries, across continents, the laughter grew louder. People shared the moment through their devices, memes and jokes flooding the networks faster than the Empire's warnings. "Oh no, space bullies," one headline joked. "We survived history's worst. We'll survive this too," another said. In moments, fear transformed into a strange, wild pride. Humans, battered by their own history of wars and disasters, had learned one thing above all: when the world tries to scare you into submission, you laugh back and keep moving. Vrothak, watching the reaction from his command ship, was baffled. His advisors stumbled over explanations, trying to understand what had gone wrong. They had expected tears, pleas, chaos. Instead, they faced something they had no weapon against: stubborn, fearless laughter. The Empire's high command, watching from afar, grew uneasy. They had never faced a species that met terror with amusement. Their strategy was based on fear being the most powerful force in the universe. But Earth showed them something terrifyingly new. Fear could be resisted, and sometimes it could even be laughed at. What if other worlds heard about this? What if the myth of the Empire's unstoppable fear was shattered? The first crack had already appeared, and they knew how fast cracks could spread. Orders were rushed through the command lines: escalate the situation. Make examples. Show humanity that laughter would lead to pain. But deep inside their cold hearts, a new and unwelcome feeling had taken root: doubt. The Empire's decision to escalate the conflict came swiftly after the humiliating laughter echoed across Earth. They were furious, but they were also careful now, realizing that underestimating humans had been their first mistake. This time, they would not rely only on threats or broadcasts. They would send forces to make direct contact, to crush the human spirit personally if needed. The plan was simple yet brutal. They would land elite squads of enforcers in the heart of major cities, show their physical power, and break the humans' confidence by sheer, overwhelming presence. The first ship, larger than any human aircraft, descended from the sky like a black dagger falling toward the Earth, its surface shimmering with invisible shields. It chose a landing site in the center of New York City, the place where the laughter had been the loudest and the defiance the strongest. Around the ship, the city held its breath, the tall buildings casting long shadows in the dimming evening light, while people watched with a mixture of curiosity, fear, and the strange stubbornness that had already shocked the Empire once before .as the ship touched down, its massive landing. Struts crushing the ground beneath them, a loud mechanical hiss filled the air, and a ramp extended down to the cracked concrete. From the dark interior, the Empire's enforcers marched out in perfect formation, tall creatures, clad in black and silver armor, their faces hidden behind cruel, insect-like masks. Each carried weapons designed not just to kill, but to terrify, humming with unknown energy. At their head walked Vrothak himself, taller and more imposing than any human soldier, his armor shining like the surface of a frozen moon. The enforcers spread out into the streets, clearing a wide circle around their ship. Human police and military forces, already warned but still uncertain how to respond, held their positions with weapons ready but lowered, knowing a single mistake could trigger something catastrophic. For a few tense moments, no one moved. Then Vrothak stepped forward, his voice once again amplified across every device in the city, challenging the humans directly. He demanded that Earth surrender now, that the leaders of the planet come forward and kneel before the might of the Empire, or face consequences worse than anything their species had ever known. But the humans had learned something in the hours since the Empire's first message. Fear could be real, but it didn't have to rule them. A small group of civilians, daring and reckless, approached the circle of enforcers without weapons, without armor, just ordinary people wearing jeans and jackets. They stood at the edge, staring at the invaders with open defiance. Among them was a young woman with short hair and a leather jacket. She lifted it high, smiling broadly, and the crowd around her cheered. Somewhere nearby, someone played a loud recording of laughter, the sound rising and bouncing off the skyscrapers, surrounding the Empire's forces with a wall of mockery. Vrothak's eyes narrowed behind his helmet. His hand twitched toward his weapon, but he hesitated. Killing unarmed civilians was not the show of power the Empire needed. It would make the humans martyrs, not broken slaves. He had to control the situation, not fuel the fire. He gestured sharply to his soldiers, who moved forward with heavy steps, intending to push the civilians back, to shove them into retreat without bloodshed. But the humans didn't move. They stood their ground stubbornly, refusing to step back even as armored giants towered over them. The young woman with the sign looked up at Vrothak and laughed a clear, fearless laugh that echoed across the square. More people joined her, and then more, until thousands of voices filled the air with noise that no weapon could silence. Vrothak realized in that terrible moment that he was not facing an enemy that could be frightened into submission. These humans did not understand when they were supposed to be afraid. Worse, their courage was infectious, and the world was watching. Cameras broadcast the scene to billions across the planet, and people cheered from their homes, their offices, their streets. The message was clear: Earth would not kneel. Vrothak, desperate to regain control, barked an order in a guttural alien language. His enforcers activated crowd control devices, machines that sent low-frequency shockwaves meant to disorient and scatter groups. The ground shook slightly as the devices activated, and for a moment the humans stumbled. Some fell to one knee, covering their ears against the invisible attack. The Empire's forces moved forward, thinking victory was at hand. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of fleeing or collapsing, the humans pushed back. Soldiers in civilian clothes threw makeshift barriers across the streets. Ordinary people formed human chains, gripping each other tightly to stay upright. Firefighters drove trucks into the square, using their massive vehicles as shields. Even schoolchildren threw paint balloons at the enforcers, smearing their gleaming armor with bright colors that made them look ridiculous rather than fearsome. The Empire's forces hesitated. This was not the collapse they had anticipated. It was organized chaos, a living wall of resistance. Every time the enforcers pushed, the humans pushed back, not with technology or weapons, but with stubbornness, creativity, and unity. Vrothak saw his carefully planned image of fear dissolving before his eyes. In frustration, he ordered a full retreat to the ship, intending to regroup and rethink the next move. The enforcers withdrew under a rain of laughter, chants, and a few harmless projectiles. As the ramp closed behind them and the ship prepared to lift off, Vrothak stared down at the crowds below, realizing for the first time that the Empire's greatest weapon fear was powerless here. In trying to break the humans, they had only revealed their own weakness, a lack of understanding of what made humanity so dangerous. High above the planet, the Empire's command fleet watched in horror as the events unfolded. They had never seen a failure like this, never imagined a world could resist them not with force, but with spirit. For the first time in its long, brutal history, the Galactic Empire tasted humiliation. They realized that they were not dealing with a primitive race to be easily conquered. They were facing something much more difficult, a species that refused to break, that turned fear into defiance, and that found strength in unity. Earth was no longer just another target. It had become a symbol, a warning to all other oppressed worlds that maybe, just maybe, the Empire was not invincible after all. Inside the central command chamber of the Galactic Empire's flagship, silence settled like a suffocating fog. Holographic displays showed the failure on Earth in humiliating detail. Elite enforcers retreating, civilians mocking them, laughter echoing across entire cities. The high generals sat in cold disbelief, their glowing eyes scanning the data, trying to make sense of what had gone wrong. Never before had a world defied them like this, not with fleets or weapons, but with unity, wit, and a refusal to be afraid. Supreme Commander Thalvok stood rigid before the Central Council, his voice bitter as he tried to explain that Earth had become something they were not prepared for, a battlefield of ideas and spirit, not just of weapons. The Emperor himself, shrouded in darkness at the head of the chamber, remained silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold and measured, like a blade being drawn. He declared that this was not just defiance. This was a threat to the Empire's image across the galaxy. Billions of conquered species had seen humans laughing at fear, and that dangerous spark could spread. Rebellion, once thought impossible, might now look achievable to slaves who had watched Earth's resistance. The Emperor's decision was final. Earth was to be crushed, not only physically, but psychologically, and the reaction had to be immediate and overwhelming. The order was sent across the fleet, activating deep strike protocols never before used on a single planet. Entire squadrons of shock cruisers were rerouted from outer sectors, planetary bombardment ships were placed on standby, and intelligence units began scanning every human communication, every broadcast, trying to identify what made them so dangerous. Meanwhile, a special task force was formed, psychological warfare specialists, who would craft messages meant to twist the human spirit from the inside. They planned to exploit divisions among humans, provoke panic, spread false news, and turn their unity into chaos. While the generals focused on weapons, the Emperor understood something deeper. Humans were not afraid of death, not when they believed in something greater. So he ordered them to take away hope itself. Across the stars, the Empire's might began to shift toward Earth like a gathering storm. And yet, beneath the surface of their grand plans, an uneasy feeling began to grow, a sense that perhaps, for all their power, they had already lost the war of perception. Back on Earth, governments scrambled to prepare for retaliation. Human leaders, military strategists, and scientists came together like never before, setting aside their old differences in the face of a common enemy. They knew the Empire would return, this time with real firepower, and they had little time to prepare. But something had changed after the first encounter. Humanity was no longer afraid. The laughter that once embarrassed the Empire had become a symbol, a battle cry, and people across the world were now volunteering in huge numbers to help. Engineers worked day and night to reverse engineer fragments of alien tech left behind. Cyber experts fought against Empire interference in communications, and civilians trained in shelters, ready to protect their cities. The Empire thought they would divide Earth, but they had united it more than any threat in human history ever had. Even in the darkest corners of space, small resistance cells on other worlds began to send messages of support. Whispers traveled from slave to slave in conquered sectors. Earth is fighting back, and they laughed. In orbit above Earth, the Empire's war fleet finally arrived, hundreds of ships forming a metallic wall across the sky. The lead commander, General Vorthax, looked down at the blue planet with hatred in his eyes. His orders were clear: break their spirit before breaking their bones. From orbit, the Empire began transmitting propaganda across every human channel. Fake messages showed Earth's leaders begging for surrender, cities burning, people turning on each other. But the humans weren't fooled. They had learned to recognize manipulation, and their own hackers countered the Empire's lies with truth. Real-time videos of unity, of soldiers helping civilians, of children painting symbols of resistance, flooded the networks faster than the Empire could suppress them. Infuriated, the Empire initiated targeted strikes, not full destruction, but enough to scare the population. Energy blasts leveled uninhabited areas, creating massive craters as warnings. Still, the humans did not beg. Instead, they evacuated with discipline, rebuilt shelters, and prepared for war. Then came the unexpected within the Empire's own ships. Confusion spread. Morale dropped as more and more soldiers began to question the mission. Recordings from Earth had made their way into the ranks, videos of unarmed civilians staring down armored giants, of laughter in the face of fear. Some alien soldiers, bred for obedience, had never seen resistance like this. They began to wonder, if humans could stand against the unstoppable, why couldn't they? The seeds of doubt were growing. Back in the capital, the Emperor sensed the shift, but it was too late. His reaction, meant to destroy Earth's will, had instead made it stronger and worse. It had made his own forces uncertain. The Empire, for all its power, had revealed something fatal. Fear was its only weapon, and now the humans had proven it didn't work. The Empire's reaction was supposed to end the rebellion before it began. Instead, it ignited a fire across the galaxy. On Earth, bunkers echoed with songs instead of cries. On distant worlds, slaves whispered the name human like a prayer. The galaxy was watching, and what they saw was not a world in ruins, but a world that laughed back. The Empire's grip had started to crack. and they knew it. For the first time in 1,000 years, the Empire faced a truth it couldn't erase. Humans were not just resisting. They were inspiring others to rise. As the Empire tightened its grip around Earth, something unexpected began to unfold in the shadows of resistance. While their warships loomed above and their messages of fear flooded the networks, humanity had not only endured, they had adapted. Hidden within mountain bunkers, underwater stations, and secret orbital platforms, human scientists, engineers, and military minds worked without rest. They weren't just preparing to survive, they were preparing to strike. The Empire had underestimated the power of desperation mixed with unity, and now that very mistake was about to cost them. Deep in the Arctic Circle, an experimental facility known only to a handful of human leaders had achieved something remarkable. Using fragments of alien technology left behind after the failed invasion, scientists had developed a hybrid defense system, one that could scramble enemy sensors, bend signals, and even hijack small parts of the Empire's own communication grid. This wasn't just a tool, it was the key to changing the tide of the war. At the same time, resistance forces across the globe, once disorganized, had now united under a single command, operating as one heartbeat with a single purpose: to show the Empire that humanity was not prey, but a force with teeth. The first major shift happened not in space, but on a dusty battlefield in the ruins of what used to be a small town. An elite Empire detachment landed, expecting another quick show of dominance. Instead, they were met with coordinated strikes, traps made from scavenged tech, and human soldiers who moved like ghosts through the wreckage. The aliens were routed, captured, disarmed, and the entire operation broadcast live across Earth's networks and somehow beyond. The hacked transmission was brief but powerful. A human soldier standing calmly beside a captured alien general, saying only, "We are still here." That single message shattered the illusion of control. Across the galaxy, oppressed races began to believe. The Empire tried to shut the footage down, but it was too late. Millions had seen it, and whispers of rebellion spread faster than the Empire could silence them. What had once been a war over a small blue planet had now become a symbol of freedom, and humans were no longer seen as just another species, they were becoming legends. The Emperor's advisors panicked, urging more brutal methods, but every strike seemed to backfire. The more the Empire tried to crush the humans, the more united and dangerous they became. Then came the moment that truly shifted everything. Earth's moon, long considered a lifeless gray rock with old human bases, had become the front line of a secret countermeasure. For months, engineers had worked to transform it into a shielded platform, hiding a weapon unlike any the galaxy had seen. They called it the Pulse, a device capable of sending a directed energy wave that could disable non-human tech systems across a vast range. It couldn't destroy ships, but it could blind them, freeze their controls, and leave them exposed. On the night it was activated, hundreds of Empire vessels drifted silently above Earth, unaware that the very sky beneath them had changed. With a blinding pulse of energy, dozens of ships went dark, their systems fried temporarily. Human jets, retrofitted with both human and alien tech, launched with perfect precision, disabling Empire weapons and capturing floating vessels. It was not a full victory, but it was the first major strike that caused the Empire to retreat in panic. The once unstoppable armada was now cautious, uncertain, and that hesitation changed everything. The Emperor, furious and humiliated, demanded explanations, but even his generals had none. How could a primitive world, barely advanced enough for deep space, outmaneuver a galactic empire? The answer lay in something the Empire had forgotten: humans did not rely only on machines, but on instinct, creativity, and the unbreakable will to fight when all seemed lost. The Emperor ordered the destruction of Earth once and for all, preparing to use forbidden weapons, but the turning point had already occurred. His own forces were beginning to fracture. Reports poured in from other planets: uprisings, ambushes, sabotage. In the Outer Rim, entire garrisons had turned against the Empire, inspired by Earth's defiance. Even within the Empire's high command, voices of doubt were rising. Some whispered that the humans were more than just lucky, they were the beginning of the end for the old order. On Earth, celebrations were quiet but powerful. People didn't cheer loudly, but they looked to the sky with new eyes. The fear that once froze their hearts was gone, replaced by determination. The pulse was only the first step. Plans were already in motion to build more, to spread human influence to other moons, even nearby planets. They were no longer defending, they were expanding. The resistance was now not just a shield, it was a spear. And as for the Empire, it had been forced into a position it never thought possible, reacting, doubting, fearing. For the first time, they didn't feel like rulers. They felt hunted. That feeling, that moment of weakness, was the true turning point. The war was far from over, but now it had changed forever. Humanity had done more than survive, they had taken the first step in teaching the galaxy that even the smallest spark could ignite a revolution. The war had changed the face of the galaxy, and nothing would ever be the same again. The mighty empire that once ruled through fear, fire, and silence now stood fractured, its proud fleet scattered, its loyal systems questioning their allegiance, and its citizens looking not to their emperor but toward Earth. In the heart of what was once a conquered world, now the symbol of resistance and rebirth, the humans stood tall, not as victims, but as leaders of a new movement. Across every corner of the galaxy, oppressed species whispered the name human, not with curiosity or contempt anymore, but with respect and hope. Earth, once ignored and underestimated, had become the spark that shattered centuries of control. The pulse weapon had marked the first major shift, but what followed was far more powerful than any single strike. It was the rise of an idea. A belief that no empire, no matter how old or strong, could defeat the will of people who refused to break. The empire's remaining commanders tried to regroup, to intimidate again, but the fear was gone. Entire planets, once loyal to the throne, now declared independence. Embassies of the newly forming Galactic Free Coalition reached out to Earth for help, and humans, those strange, determined creatures, responded not with domination, but with open arms and warnings born from pain. In massive orbiting stations built from the wreckage of both human and alien ships, meetings were held with representatives of many species, most of them unfamiliar with one another, until war had brought them together. They were diplomats, fighters, engineers, and thinkers who had once believed the galaxy was too vast for their voices to matter. But now, they stood together, and at the heart of every gathering sat at least one human, a reminder that even when surrounded and outmatched, courage could shape history. The Emperor, hidden behind layers of security in a distant star system, raged against the betrayal of his allies and the collapse of his power. But he was no longer feared as he once was. His speeches, once filled with commands, now sounded desperate. His armies were shrinking not from death in battle, but from defection, and his fleets had to choose between blind loyalty or joining the side that actually gave them a future. Meanwhile, Earth had transformed in silence. Cities damaged by the early assaults had been rebuilt with new technology. Skies once filled with dread now buzzed with interstellar ships, trade vessels, and diplomatic envoys. Earth's people, once afraid of every shadow in the stars, now worked side by side with aliens who had once called them primitive. Children learned about the war in schools, but also about unity, resistance, and the danger of silence in the face of oppression. Scientists who had once focused only on defense were now building bridges, literal ones, connecting planets, moons, and even distant systems through new warp tunnels and communication relays. The galaxy had become smaller, but in that closeness came strength. There was no ruling body, no new empire rising from the ashes, but instead a shared council led not by power, but by voice. Humanity had taken a seat, not at the head, but in the circle, earning their place through action and sacrifice. They had proven something no other species had dared, that laughter in the face of fear was more terrifying to tyrants than any weapon. The moment the Empire tried to scare the humans and heard laughter instead, that was when they truly lost. That laughter had echoed far beyond Earth, and it still rang through the hearts of those who now dared to live free, though the threat of the Empire hadn't vanished completely. Rogue admirals tried to hold on to power, but even their soldiers looked to Earth and asked, "Why not us?" Resistance became revolution, and revolution became structure. It wasn't perfect. Nothing born from chaos ever is, but it was better. It was real. The humans never claimed to be saviors, but they had shown everyone what was possible. Their victories were not just military, they were symbolic. They proved that intelligence wasn't only measured in technology, that strength wasn't just about size, and that survival wasn't luck, it was choice. And when people made the choice to stand together, even the most powerful force in the galaxy could fall. On the edge of the known systems, a monument was built, a simple structure shaped like Earth's old lighthouses, glowing with soft blue light. It wasn't grand or golden, but it stood as a symbol for all who passed by, that even in the darkest void, a single light could guide the way. This was the beginning of a new era, not ruled by fear, not driven by conquest, but defined by cooperation and courage. And in every council hall, every history book, and every distant world where a mother whispered stories to her child, there would always be the tale of the day humanity laughed in the face of fear and changed the galaxy forever.